Thank you, Linda. Good morning to all of you. I'm in the US on the West Coast, so it's like 8:30 p.m. for me and Yushi, and Paulo is on the East Coast of the US, so it's like 11:30 for him. So good night for us. Thank you guys for this opportunity to share our research with you all. And our team is bringing to you the US perspective of out of field teaching in science. So, all three of us, Yushi, Paulo, and I, will present. We'll take turns. So, I'll begin by introducing myself. I am Harleen Singh. I'm an assistant professor of education at California State University, Stanislaus. Yushi?
Hello, everyone. My name is Yuxi Huang. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of California in Irvine. Paulo?
So I'm Paulo Augusto Loureiro, a PhD student in science education at the University of Georgia. And we are here to present you a piece of a project funded by the National Science Foundation. The name of the project is Scaffold. And this project is focused on professional development of science coordinators. In this presentation, we want to explore how teachers in field and out of field self-report their usage and are able to notice the use of the next generation science standards, the NGSS, in order to identify differences and similarities between these groups of teachers. So first of all, we need to define what it means to be a teacher out of field in the United States. This definition is hard to be determined in this country since different states have different definitions. We also have different levels of out-of-field teachers. For example, a small shift would be like a chemistry teacher teaching biology, and a big shift would be like a biology teacher teaching physics, because they may have a lack of content knowledge. We consider this as something hidden in plain sight because there are a lot of policies saying that it cannot happen, but in fact, we see that this happens a lot. About that, we brought you some data that shows how expressive is the out-of-field teaching, considering science fields in the US. This data show that a high rate of middle public school students are taught science by teachers outside of their area of expertise, areas that they are not certificated to teach. The next generation science standards are standards that set the expectation for what students should know and be able to do. In the US, 49 of the 50 states adopts the NGSS as it is, or state standards are aligned with it. The NGSS considers three pillars that support each standard: the science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. It's important to highlight that these dimensions are interdependent. So for example, it's important for a teacher to have content knowledge to be able to engage students in the practices. And this study is focused on the practices. And these science and engineering practices that we call by SCPs, they describe different practices that students engage in the classroom. This practice emulate the works that scientists and engineers do in real life. NGSS recommend that teachers provide opportunities for students to engage in these practices.
So combining all together, there are two research questions guide our study. First, how do out-of-field and in-field science teachers report implementing the SEPs and notice the SEPs in the classroom instruction video? Second, how do out-of-field and in-field science teachers compare across their implementation of the SEPs and noticing of the SEPs in a classroom instruction video? So before dive into the method, I want to briefly introduce the out-of-field teaching research in science. So many research, they indicate that out-of-field science teachers, they face more challenges in enacting their lessons than their in-field counterparts. For example, in a longitudinal study of 70 out-of-field science teachers, the authors find that out-of-field teachers, they use more like isolated SEPs than their in-field counterparts, regardless of their years of experiences. They also suggested that out-of-field science teachers, they may be at risk of not cultivating their science instruction than in-field science teachers. Another research, which is also longitudinal cross case study, the authors find that early career out-of-field physical science teachers, they presented less developed PCK and showed more inconsistencies than in-field teachers. Besides that, there is also a gap that connecting knowledge and practices of out-of-field science teachers. So in our study, we are interested in the connection between the knowledge and the performance of out-of-field science teachers. This is why we are using the framework like teacher noticing. Teachers often face various and complex classroom situations. What stands out to them and what helps them make the decisions in the classroom are salient issues impacting students' learning. Teacher noticing refers to teachers' ability to perceive and interpret specific learning events in the classroom, which reflect the dynamic and also situated aspect of teaching expertise. Teacher noticing can often reflect teachers' knowledge, and it can often serve as a predictor for teachers' instructional practice. So in our study, for teacher noticing, we capture the science teachers noticing by a video-based interview, and we also measure teachers' instructional practice by a survey. We have 37 secondary science teachers in our study, and they are from 10 different states in the US. We divided these 37 secondary science teachers into 3 groups. First group, there are 10 science teachers who are completely in field. They teach physics or physical science in field, and they watch the physical science video in our study. For the second group, these teachers are partly OF. They teach physics or physical science out of field, and they also watch the physical science video in our study. And the last group, the teachers, they are completely out of field. They don't teach physics or physical science, but they watch the physical science video in our study. So as I mentioned before, the teacher's performance, which is their instructional practice, they are measured by a survey in our study. So for this survey, this is the self-reported survey to track science teachers' SEP's implementation frequency, which was developed before in 2016. And it has 24 items, including 6 categories. And as you can see in the picture, it's a Likert scale. Teachers were asked, how often do your students do each of the following in your science classes? And they need to answer from 1 to 5, from never, rare, sometimes, often, or daily. And then for teachers noticing, they are captured by a video-based interview. So for the video, this is a 10 minutes video incorporating 3 SCPs. And it's middle school 6th grade science teachers teaching photovoltaics. So it means the content is physical science. So we show the participants this video, and then we ask them to let us know when they notice something important in the teaching of science. And when they see something important, they can raise their hand or just say stop. So then we stop the video and they provide their thoughts, and they provide the reason why they think that's important. To analyze the data, first for the survey data, the teacher's choices of never, rare, sometimes, often, daily, or almost daily were assigned to score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 respectively. We first summed up the scores in different categories and then divided the sum scores by the number of corresponding items for each category, which follows the author's suggestions in the original article. And we should note here that you can see the name of the categories. They are a little bit different from the SEPs. So to keep the consistency in all the findings related to survey, we will use the term suggested by the survey developer, but for discussion part, we will use the NGSS term. And after getting the scores, we conducted a descriptive analysis, and we also conducted an inferential analysis, which we used the generalized linear model. So before introduce how we analyze the video data, I wanna briefly say we just focus on one component of teacher noticing in our data analysis. So for the video-based interview, we collected teachers' responses, but in the analysis, we just focused on what they attend to. So attending, it's foundational components of teacher noticing. Without attending, interpretation and decision making, they can never happen. So in our study, we focus firstly on the attending. And as you can see, this picture, it shows our coding sheet. We collected the teachers' demographic information, including their teaching assignment and primary area of certification. Then we look at what SEPs the teacher noticed when they watch the video. We did a priori coding based on the SEPs and NGSS. But I should note, this is just part of our coding sheet. Yeah.
So for the findings, we are presenting the findings to you question-wise. So the first question, or the first part of the first question, we wanted to see how out-of-field and in-field secondary science teachers self-report implementing the science and engineering practices. So the data here is we have a descriptive analysis of the data from the survey, and we've made a comparison of the in-field, the partly out-of-field, and the completely out-of-field teachers, so the three groups, their implementation frequencies of the science and engineering practices, and the three categories that we have expressed. Again, these align with four of the practices from the NGSS. So they're the only three from the data that we are presenting here. And these were also the practices that were actually present in the classroom video that the teachers watched. So then we went on and did the generalized linear model, the GLM analysis, and the results showed us that there was no significant difference between in-field and out-of-field science teachers' self-report of the use of the science and engineering practices for the practices of the critique, argumentation, and explanation, and the modeling subscales. But there was a significant difference in one of the practices, and that was instigating and investigation. So for instigating an investigation, we saw that the in-field physics teachers, the p-value of 0.033, and for partly out-of-field teachers, it was 0.048, and so the score was significantly higher for incorporating the practices as compared to the completely out-of-field physical science teachers. For the second part of the first question, we wanted to see how out-of-field and in-field secondary science teachers notice the SEPs in the classroom instruction video. So again, we've got three groups here. The in-field group is the teachers who teach physics or physical science in field, and they watch the physical science video. And so 40% of these teachers actually noticed at least one of the science and engineering practice or more. For the partly out of field teachers, these were the teachers who were out of field but taught physics, and they watched a physical science video, and 20% of these teachers noticed at least one science and engineering practice. And the third group, which we classified as completely out of field, these were teachers who did not have any teaching experience with physics or physical science. They had no background or content knowledge of physics or physical science. They were life science teachers, and only 12% of them noticed at least one science and engineering practice. And another thing that stands out here is that 60% of the in-field teachers did not notice even one of the practice. They did notice other instructional practice strategies, like general pedagogical skills, which teachers use in the classroom. But when we had asked them specific to the NGSS, and 60% of them did not notice any of these. So coming to the second question, we looked at how out-of-field and in-field science teachers compare across the implementation of the SEPs and noticing of the SEPs in the instructional video. So we saw that there was a gap between teachers noticing of the SEPs and the self-report of the use of the SEPs. So the self-reported survey, it revealed that the in-field and out-of-field science teachers, they were using these practices consistently. Whereas the video interview data revealed that the out-of-field teachers were noticing less of the practices or fewer practices than the in-field teachers did. So this is a table which gives you the details of the percent of teachers who noticed a practice and how often the teachers self-reported engaging in the practice for modeling and critique, argumentation, and explanation. So as you can see here, there's a gap between what teachers notice and the implementation of a practice. And so, for example, in critique, argumentation, and explanation, none of the teachers, whether in field, partly or completely out of field, none of them noticed or talked about this particular science and engineering practice. But their self-report said that they did consistently use this practice in the classroom with at least once or twice a month or more. So for the discussion in the out of the video interview that we did for the out of field science teachers, we saw that the in-field teachers who were physical science teachers or physics teachers watching a physical science teacher video, there were maximum instances of noticing of the practices, with minimum instances being on teachers who never taught physical science, had no background, and when they watched a physical science video. So they had the minimum instances of noticing of the science and engineering practices. So this may be a reflection of their limited depth of knowledge of the SEPs in the outer field content area. And this would in turn impact their classroom performance and how they use the practices in the classroom. So we saw that there was this gap between teachers' self-reported use of the practices and what they noticed in the videos. So our data agrees with the study, with the findings of Napier et al., who found that out-of-field science teachers had more isolated science and engineering practices than the in-field counterparts, irrespective of their years of experience. So this was a longitudinal study in which they followed 17 physical science teachers over 3 years, the first 3 years of their teaching experience, to see how their knowledge develops and how the use of the practices changes over time. And so what they saw was that when the outer field teachers did use these practices, but they were very isolated, there was no sophistication in them, the enactment did not portray a depth of practice. And this also did not improve over time. So this is something very similar to what we are finding, in the sense that the teachers in our study said they are using them. So we say, okay, you're using them, but since they're not able to identify them, that means they do not have the depth of knowledge of using these practices. Secondly, to looking at the disconnect between what out-of-field teachers notice and what they say they do. So this may result from the resources and the supports that are available to teachers at the school site. So all teachers, including the out-of-field teachers, get district-approved curriculum, which they can use in their classrooms. They have the NGSS developed materials, again, available for teachers for free. They have their own colleagues, their professional learning communities. Then they have other resources like the internet, and they love to use teachers, paid teachers here. So all of those resources, they have that support and the resources. So the teachers are definitely using the SEPs in their classroom, but they may not develop the adequate professional knowledge for the nuanced learning of reform-based science practices. And we found that in-field science teachers engage their students in the practices of instigating an investigation more often than the out-of-field teachers. And out-of-field teachers might not have the adequate knowledge to incorporate these investigations in other science content area. And this may be because the epistemology of science subjects is different. So our study has implications for both the teacher preparation and for in-service teachers, and the need for additional support for implementing the science and engineering practices in more sophisticated ways in the classroom. So at the teacher education level, we need to prepare our teachers more about the science and engineering practices, especially across all science content areas, and not just for the one that they get credentialed for. And for the in-service teachers, again, professional development is going to be important, and not just for out-of-field science teachers focused on the SEPs, but for all science teachers, because we saw such low noticing of the practices in the classroom video interviews. Also, targeted PD on the SEPs would be helpful. For example, we can have separate targeted modules for each SEP, which the teachers can do on their own and they can do separately. And for the future research based on the findings of this study, we want to take it a step further, and because we want to find out the reason. So, why was this, to be able to explain the gap between what teachers notice and what they do in the classroom practice? So, an interview-based study with the teachers would be helpful, and that's what the next step of this research we are planning on. So, thank you for listening, and this is our contact information. And questions and feedback is much appreciated.